Now,
All right. Hello, class. Welcome to week number 11. That is right, week number 11 of your 9443 class, which is your academic libraries class. As always, I'm your professor, Dr. J.S.K. Austin, and today we will have another guest speaker. This is Danny Wallenmeyer. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Am I?
you got it.
Excellent. And she is an outreach librarian with UMKC Libraries in Kansas City, Missouri. And what she will be talking about is basically a signage project that was going on with the UMKC Libraries that she sort of spearheaded. Signage is another one of those kind of smaller issues that should probably still be talked about, but you don't actually get modules about signage usually in your academic libraries class. So I figured Danny would be the perfect person to talk about that a little bit. Now, before I turn it over to Danny, I just have really just a couple of course updates. First of all, I told you all about the book that you would have for one of the modules where you needed to download the content ahead of time because it only allowed for one concurrent user at a time. And that is going to actually be next week. So if you look at the week 12 module, you will see that title. Go ahead and download some of the content that the directions tell you to download, and go ahead and do that so that not everybody is doing it next week. I've been telling you all about this throughout the semester. So hopefully you've all already done it by now, but if not, do it this week. And then next week, you can just go ahead and read and not run into any issues. Other than that, the only other update that I think I have is that our final synced session, which will be the community college panel, that will be on November the 18th. So be prepared for that, and your final assignments are due in December. That is all I have for you right now. And so I am going to turn it over to Danny and allow her to talk about the signage project that she did for UMKC. Thank you, Danny.
Cool. Hi, I'm Danny. As Jason let you know, I work here at UMKC Libraries as an outreach librarian. So I have one of those jobs where I do a bunch of stuff. I do a little bit of research and instruction. I work at our service desk, and I do a lot of projects where we directly engage with different student groups on campus. And I also do a lot of our external communication. So writing and building signage kind of falls into that area. So in our library building, we have library directories. We have floor plans, which are maps of each floor that show you where you are. And we also have wayfinder signage. Our wayfinder signage was super old. It hung from the ceiling on these signs that hung down from the ceiling, and it basically was really out of date and was also kind of hard to see. And so this past summer, when the library was renovating the third floor, we had funding to update our entire interior signage system. And so I'm going to show you what we ended up with throughout that process. So these are images, like the design files for the signage that we ended up installing. So right now you're looking at a library directory. This is the alphabetical listing that shows you all of the destinations inside Miller-Nichols Library. It's alphabetical, it has some icons, and it tells you what floor to find this on. You'll remember this from something like a dentist's office or like a medical building where it's got a ton of stuff on different floors. So those are the directories. We also have floor plans, which look like this. This shows you a visual representation of all the things that are on each floor of the library, so that if you're the kind of person who wants to orient yourself right and left or using cardinal directions, you can find where things are on the floor plans. And then the third component is wayfinding signage, and that looks like this. So these are wayfinders that are installed on corners or columns on each floor of the library with directional arrows that say, keep going this way if you're looking for computers and printers, or turn this way if you're looking for restrooms, things like that. So for this project, I worked with our user interface designer who does our graphic design and our website, and our person who's in charge of electronic resources and systems. We kind of worked as a team to figure out what we needed to change about our signage system to help people find what they needed. Some of the problems we were trying to solve were basically having an updated system that was much easier for people to use and that we could more easily update. A signage system is no good if it has incorrect information, and our old system had been in place for like 10 or more years, and it was difficult for us to make changes as things in the libraries changed. So when something got a new name or we renovated a floor and it had different destinations on it, it was hard for us to make updates. So we needed something new and something more accessible. So we had a lot of accessibility principles at front of mind when we were designing the system. And I'm going to talk about those as we go along today. So wayfinding signage serves a bunch of different purposes, things like identification, directions, orientation, and regulation. Identification is like when you get to a destination, it says administrative office in big letters, so you know you've gotten there. It also tells you what the function of the space is. So it might say staff room, and then you know that's for you if you're staff, not for you if you're a library user. Directional tells you turn right or left, and helps you navigate a space as you're walking around. Orientation tells you where you are in the space. So this is the main function of the floor plans, and it has a little star that says you are here. So you can figure out where to go to get to that thing. And regulatory is how to use a space. One of the main things that we have on our signs that's regulatory is noise levels. So in our library, on the ground and first floors, we have what we call regular conversation. We have a lot of group study and meeting spaces there. And so we want people to be able to talk to their groups at a normal level and not worry about noise restrictions. Our second and third floors are quiet conversation. You can talk to people or your group, but you need to keep it down. The fourth floor is totally silent, no talking, no noise, no cell phones. And so that's also reinforced in a bunch of different places on our signage system. So we also have a color coding system in place. Our library has like a signature color for each floor. The ground floor is green, the first floor is red. And we wanted to incorporate that color palette into our signage system to help people identify what floor they're on. We have a 5-story building where you can come in on the ground floor or you can come in on the first floor. So we needed to reinforce which floor you are in when you come in and which floor you're on when you come in an entrance or when you come out of an elevator or a stairwell. So we made some updates to the color palette to make it brighter and more contemporary. And this also gives us better contrast between the background color and the color of the text so that it's easier to see and read. That color system also has a secondary function, which is to indicate the volume level of the floors. So at the bottom of the directory, you can see that there's a key, volume levels by floor, ground and first say regular conversation, 2 and 3 say quiet, and 4 says silent. So if we are posting any signage on those floors that relates to noise level, we use those same colors every time. Users don't always notice the color coding system, but it's kind of one of those underlying principles that helps us to make design decisions, but also like subtly reinforces the system of knowing what floor you're on or what the sound level is. We also have icons and directional arrows. So when you look at one of the wayfinders, you can see that some of them have icons like restrooms, because there's kind of a standard universal icon that you can use for those types of places, and others don't. For example, the Emeritus College doesn't have an icon because there's no universal icon that people could look at and automatically know what an Emeritus College is. If you don't know what an Emeritus College is, when faculty retire from the university, if they have a certain standing, they can get emeritus status, which basically means they're faculty for life. So the Emeritus College is where those retired professors can work and do research. So when we were figuring out how to put the directional arrows on the wayfinders, this was a really big project, trying to figure out if we should tell people to go straight or turn right. And for each of the items on the list, we discussed if we could reasonably include an icon without including unnecessary ones or putting in ones that would require explanation. This is also an accessibility feature, because if a visitor is visually impaired or has difficulty reading, an icon's a useful tool that they can use to understand what the item is. People read, learn, and remember directions in different ways. So using the various visual cues to communicate information helps to create memorable patterns with the end goal of getting the visitors where they need to go. So the icons on our directory are the same as the icons on our wayfinder, which are the same as the icons on the floor plans. So another thing that was important for accessibility was figuring out the height of the wayfinders. The wayfinders are attached to the wall, and we needed to consider the average height of a mobile visitor, a person who's walking around, the height of a seated or wheelchair using visitor, the visibility of the wayfinders from a distance, like how far away you can stand and still read them, and signage visibility above a crowded area. Some of the areas in our library have a ton of foot traffic because we're connected to a building that has classrooms in it. And so we wanted to make sure that you could at least see the top of the wayfinders from far away and then walk up closer to read them. So we consulted with our architect on this for best practices and figured out that a height of 5 feet on center was the appropriate placement for our type of signage. So a wayfinder that has 6 bands is going to extend higher and lower than that 5 foot mark. A wayfinder that only has 3 bands is going to be shorter, but its center mark is still going to be at 5 feet. This photo is part of our process of figuring out what we were going to put on each wayfinder, what direction the arrows were going to face, all of that kind of thing. This is a paper mock-up that we tried out. So we wanted to do some usability testing. So we put up paper mock-ups on our first floor. We changed the arrows a bunch of times. You can see that there's like sticky notes and little arrows taped over it because we had to keep changing. We learned a lot from this process. And we also got some of our staff members and student workers to walk around and look at them and see if they made sense. So where we placed the wayfinders was a balancing act between giving the right amount of information and putting it in the right place at the right time. So we looked at each floor of our library and figured out the most important points of interest on that floor or the destinations. And then we thought about sight lines and possible obstructions. So if we put a wayfinder here and here, can you see them from each other or is there something in the way? So we made mock-ups and experimented with some more complicated arrow configurations, like there are computers this way and there are computers this way, but it was confusing and it didn't make things any clearer. So we decided to really simplify our arrows, and this led us to a design decision where we determined that at each wayfinder, we would point someone to the destination if it was visible within a sight line, and if it wasn't, we would point them to the next wayfinder. So if they had to take 2 turns to get to a destination, instead of trying to put it on this wayfinder right here, we would tell them to go right. And then at the next wayfinder, we would tell them to go left. And then the last wayfinder on the visitor's journey would ultimately point them to their end destination. Another thing we had to do, so this shows you on our first floor where all the different wayfinders are placed. So you can kind of see from an entrance right here that you're going to encounter a wayfinder. And if you turn left, you'll encounter another one. And if you go straight, you'll see this one. And our service desk is right here. And so we also decided to put a lot of wayfinders in places that would send a user past a service desk so they could ask clarifying questions if they needed to. And this is one of our biggest wayfinders. Our first floor has a ton of destinations on it. And so this one has an awful lot of information on it. This one also is placed across from our service desk, very close to it. So if you stop here and you can't figure out how to get started on finding the spot you're going to, you can always just stop and ask a person. So most of our location items and service names are pretty clear cut. We have one thing that we call them. However, we had to determine what to label some items, choosing between their official name and how visitors actually refer to those things. A good example of this is room numbers, which are on this one. When students get their courses, it's listed with the room location as a building code plus a room number. And so this is the format we decided to use for labeling all rooms in the library. So MNL space 114 is one of our library classrooms. So instead of putting library classroom, we put MNL 114 because that's how a student is used to finding a classroom. We also have the Miller-Nichols Library connected to the Miller-Nichols Learning Center, which has a lot of classrooms in it. And it's very commonly referred to as the MNLC. And so we put both of those things on our wayfinders, but we gave more visual weight to MNLC and went ahead and spelled out Miller-Nichols Learning Center underneath it. And then another thing that we updated was our labeling convention for naming and assigning icons to our newly renovated restrooms. So all of our restrooms are now all gender family friendly and wheelchair accessible spaces. And so we figured out that for the wayfinders, it was sufficient to simply note our restrooms as restrooms and then indicate the accessible nature of the space with icons for a wheelchair symbol when paired with like the universal icon of a toilet. So basically, anytime you go to a restroom in our building, you're going to find all gender restrooms and wheelchair accessible restrooms. So what we really need to tell you is how to get to any restroom location, because there's a combination of options when you get there. And then when you get there, they're clearly labeled. And the city we're in, Kansas City, recently updated implemented the same system in their restrooms. And so we got to be in alignment with the city, which is kind of helpful. So there's our, on our floor plans, how we list our all gender, family, and accessible restrooms. Okay. So I have been talking for a minute here, and I don't want this to be super long, but this project was super interesting. One of the things we learned from this was basically how much versioning and iteration we would have to do in the process. So I'm really glad that we made those paper wayfinders, the mock-ups, to try to figure out if our systems were going to work, so that we could get things as correct as possible when we first got them installed. One other cool thing that you can't really tell from these images is that each of the wayfinders is an acrylic panel that's adhered directly to the wall with a gigantic vinyl sticker over it. And this is really important because when things do change in the building, we can peel off this sticker that says restrooms and replace it with a different one that has an updated arrow or a different title, or we can change things around altogether. And so hopefully this is going to help us to keep our whole entire signage system like way more up to date, which is going to be honestly way more useful for users. So we just installed all of these earlier this semester. So we are going to be trying to get more feedback from our users, but so far it's been really good. One of the ways that we know that it's working is the kinds of questions that our service desks do and don't get. So one of our librarians said, I can't adequately express how much I like the signage. And I know it seems a bit over the top to gush about signage, but here I am doing so. As someone who has answered infinite questions at the reference desk over the past 10 years about where different spaces and services are located, I've really noticed a decrease in those questions this term. And that was the goal, not to make less work necessarily for our service desk or to get people to ask fewer questions, because we want them to ask questions at the service desk, but to give them more options to find their own way when they're in different parts of the building. And then again, having somebody at the service desk to answer their questions if they need them. Okay, I think I talked way longer than I planned to, so I'm going to pause here and then I'm going to ask Jace, what's happening next? Okay, so if you actually listened to all that, thanks for listening. We're really, really proud of this signage project because it makes a huge visual impact in our building. And I think it really forefronts for your library visitors how important accessibility is to us in our library building. And if you have any questions about this, or you want to talk more about this signage project or all of the other temporary signage that we do in the building on a day-to-day basis for various reasons. Again, my name is Danny Wellemeyer, and you can email me at wellemeyerdm@umkc.edu, and you can just ask Jace, and he will send you my email address in written format. Anyway, have a great day. Thanks.